Hi, and welcome to the second part of the Week 2 Extra Exercises solution screencasts. So in this video, I'm going to go through the pivot table and pivot chart questions from the Week 2 exercises. So we're going to be using the same spreadsheet, the emissions data workbook, and we're going to have a look at creating some pivot tables and using those to analyze the data and then also generating some graphs. So the first thing we need to do is actually create a pivot table. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. The first one is that we can highlight all of the data that we want in our pivot table. So in this case, it'd be the whole table. Actually, I should also mention here, I've actually deleted the top row. There used to be another row above here, but because it kind of had some merged cells and stuff, it does some funny things with pivot tables. So I've just removed that so that I can highlight columns and not have that included. So then you can go insert, pivot table, and you can select whether you want it in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. And when you click OK, it'll launch that. Another option is to create a blank worksheet and go insert, pivot table, and manually type in the range. So for example, we could go emissions global exclamation mark, which says we want the data from the emissions global sheet, and then A to M, which is the column range. And again, you can choose new or existing worksheet. So those are the two ways you can create a blank pivot table. And once you've got them, we'll have a look at how to use them. So click somewhere within the pivot table and you'll see all of the different column headings now come up as these pivot table fields. So just to get an idea of how this works, we'll do a basic example. So I'm going to pop country into rows and I'm going to pop the CO2 into values. So by default, it calculates the sum of CO2. So it adds up all of the CO2 emissions over the 40 odd year period. So I think it was 1970 to 2012. And it adds those up for each country. So it shows that Afghanistan had total CO2 emissions of 113,660 in that period. And similarly for all of the other countries in our list. So it's a good way to summarize the data quite quickly. In addition to sum, you can also do other statistical features. So if you go over to values and click on that sum of CO2, you can click on value field settings. And you can see here that there's also options for like count, average, minimum, maximum, quite a few different options there that might be useful to you. So that's task 6.1. We've already done this part, putting the country into the rows and CO2 into the values. Now we're going to modify the pivot tables to analyze the data a little bit more. So let's add year to the columns field to start with. So take year and drag it to columns. And then we're also going to change the sum of CO2 to the average. And that hasn't changed anything here, but what it does do is when we scroll over to the total at the end, this has changed now to the average instead of sum. So I'll just change it back so you can see the difference. So when it was sum, it had these quite large numbers. When we change it to average, it brings it down to the average emissions over that period for each country. So that's across all of the years. But we do now have a more detailed breakdown of country versus year and the emissions. So we can start to see trends as well as just an overview of 42 years of data. So I've kind of answered my own question there. What does the table look like now? We've actually got all of our countries and all of the years in that 42-year period. And then right at the end, we've got that total that summarizes it, the average that summarizes it. So that can help us to analyze trends and compare countries a little bit more easily. Next up, we're going to filter the pivot table. So we're going to have a look at the 10 countries who have produced the highest average emissions during the 5-year period of 2008 to 2012. So the first thing we need to do is we need to unselect all of the columns except for that period. So 2008 through 2012 need to be selected, all others need to be unselected. So if we come into here, we can click on the column labels drop down and we can see here a list of all of the years. So what we can do is we can click on select all to unselect all and then scroll down and click on the ones that we want and press OK. So now we can see it's been reduced to those 5 years. and the totals have adjusted accordingly. The next step is to filter and find those top 10 countries who produced the highest average emissions. So what we can do for that is we can filter in the same sort of way that we filtered in the last video. So we can click the drop down on row labels, click value filters, and if we go right down to the bottom is the top 10 option. So if you click on top 10, it automatically will go top 10 items by average of CO2, which is what we want. So press OK. And now we have this condensed table that shows the 10 countries with the highest emissions of CO2 over the last, not the last 5 years, but the latest 5 years in the data. So lastly, we want to actually sort those countries so that we can see which ones have the highest emissions through to the lowest of those top 10. So we can again do this in the filtering section. So if we head over to here and click this drop down, we can see it says sort A to Z, sort Z to A. You can click on more sort options and you can sort, we want high to low, so descending by average of CO2. And you'll see that it puts the highest one at the top and goes all the way down. So those are our top 10 worst offenders for CO2 emissions. And lastly, we can create a pivot chart to illustrate that data. So to do this, we can pretty much just select our table and we can go Insert, Pivot Chart, and it'll give us a couple of options. So here we can see a clustered column type appearance, which shows us the emissions for each of those top 10 countries across that 5-year period with the color bar showing you which year is which. And yeah, that's it. That's our pivot chart. So as you can see, pivot tables are a really good way to analyze data quickly and to get some sort of nice analysis happening, both numerically and also generate some graphs that are quite helpful. So this example that we've just gone through in the extra exercises is relatively similar to what you need to do for your assignment. So it's worth having a go at this, following along with the video and making sure that you know how to do each of the steps and then applying that knowledge to your assignment. So this is a nice short video. I'll end it here. Hopefully it's been beneficial to you and hopefully it helps with your assignment. Thanks for watching.